Longlegs from Osgood Perkins. It's a horror film about a detective investigating a mysterious satanic killer. This movie takes place in the 90s where we follow Lee Harker, played by Micah Monroe. She's an FBI agent investigating a string of murders that have occurred over the course of several decades, all of which are apparently connected to one person known only as Longlegs, played by Nicolas Cage. With supernatural activity seemingly involved with the murders, Lee and her boss, Agent Carter, played by Blair Underwood, find themselves trying to solve a very dark and challenging case. So this is a serial killer thriller. For much of the film, the killer is pretty absent, leaving us with the FBI agents who are trying to figure out the pattern behind his crimes. What's interesting is that they're hunting a killer who seemingly isn't even at the crime scenes. It's the notes left behind that are tying them all to him. There are a few things that loom over this movie, giving it suspense while Lee and Carter are trying to crack the case. It's primarily carried by the anticipation of seeing Longlegs and figuring out why Lee is so involved with this case. But there's also a scene early on with Agent Carter that, when you connect the dots, you realize is probably going to result in something big. Having a feeling of anticipation throughout the film to see those things come to light makes it a lot more exciting. Otherwise, this movie would probably be a little bit underwhelming because it is a little bit slow to start, and the revelations during the initial investigation aren't always that interesting. Not all of it will make you go, oh my god, how did I miss that? Some of it is just police work that isn't really that exciting. So the highly anticipated elements of the film are its crux, so if you find yourself minimally engaged, then you might find this movie to be a little bit sluggish. It does really take its time to divulge the details of Lee Harker's personal life, which is when the movie starts to get interesting again. This movie's tone is extremely unsettling. The subject matter is obviously very dark, but this is furthered by the film's aesthetics. This movie has a lot of static shots with incredibly shallow depth of field, which really forces you to focus on what the character is thinking and feeling. Decisions like this are critical for the movie's sentiment of wanting the viewer to feel as unsettled as the protagonist. This movie also doesn't have much music in it. Intense music will accompany the more intense scenes, but otherwise there's a lot of ominous silence with lots of pregnant pauses. They also used a lot of dim tungsten lights on set, which typically creates a more warm and positive feeling in film. Here, it definitely contributed to a unique vibe that was much different from the blue and green tints that we typically see in horror films. So Nick Cage continues what might be one of the greatest comebacks in film history by giving us a very freaky performance here. Again, he's absent from a lot of the film, so when we do get those good looks at him, we really get to bask in how hideous and demented he is. He's a little extra at times, sometimes reaching 10 out of 10 madness. Perhaps a more respectable 7 or 8 out of 10 would have felt a little bit less outlandish. So it's hard to talk about this movie without mentioning its marketing. They did some pretty cool things to build anticipation for the film and for seeing Nick Cage's face. Like the heartbeat clip playing Micah Monroe's actual heart rate at the exact moment that she saw Nick Cage as Longlegs for the first time. But of course, this type of marketing naturally sets people's expectations a little too high. It leads people to think that this movie will give them nightmares for days. This movie is really eerie, but it's not necessarily horrifying. The somber tone coupled with the dark subject matter makes it really creepy and captivating. But serial killer flicks aren't typically the most visually terrifying films. You know, they're not like body horror films. They're typically carried by their unsettling and mysterious nature. So if you don't go into this movie with that expectation, then you might be a little bit disappointed, even if it's a decent film overall. So these marketing decisions are definitely more profit-focused because they will likely sell more tickets, but then the feedback that the film gets will probably not be as good. I did like that they withheld showing us Longlegs' entire face in marketing because he is pretty hideous, just not in a particularly monstrous way. This film was broken up into 3 parts, sort of. It's labeled in 3 parts, but I just don't really think it was necessary. Chaptering a film is typically done to justify breaking the mold of a standard 3-act structure. But this movie felt pretty cohesively structured, so admittedly, I don't really understand why they did this. You can drop a comment down below if you have any insight for me. So this movie was decent. Again, it's a little slow to jump into the juicier stuff, specifically with Lee, but once it does, it fully reels you in. From there, it maintains thrills, leading all the way up to a climax that was utterly gripping. I literally had my hands over my mouth with my eyes wide open, watching the final scene play out. Overall, this was a really dark and surprisingly beautifully crafted film. This was pretty good. It's probably not gonna haunt your dreams, but it's a good watch if you're in the mood for something really eerie. But if you're looking to watch something that is just visually horrifying and obscene, then this movie probably won't scratch that itch. Thank you for watching this review. If it brought you any value at all, please give it a like. It really does help the channel grow. I'll see you later this week with my review of Fly Me to the Moon.